About 2 billion people in the world believe in Jesus. All the educated, advanced nations people have rejected Bible and Jesus Christ. But still so many believe. So we should see whether such a person lived or not. What can we know from history? Know about Jesus, whatever is written has been written by Christian authors, anonymous authors mostly, who were not historians. There is no scientific, archaeological, or historical evidence for Jesus' birth or death or life. Many historians of the last and before last centuries tried to establish this historicity, and in 1900s historians categorically stated such a person did not live at all. But in my studies, I was a student for Catholic priesthood and I did study theology and Catholic philosophy, and I read a number of books, and I feel the probability is that a person, a Jewish rabbi, married person, lived and he raved against the hypocrites, Jewish elites, scribes and Pharisees, and he was crucified by the Roman Empire. But well, if he was the person as mentioned in the evangelists, who were all trying to make him a god, curing lepers, giving eyesight, and hearing to so many people, raising the dead, with a multitude of people following him, everybody should be knowing him. There was no need for Judas to betray him. There was absolutely, all historians of his time must have written about him. But when we analyze the historical documents of his period, we find there is no reference. There is not even an allusion to him. Philo, the Jewish historian of the first century, even though Philo lived when this guy was supposed to have been crucified, does not mention him in his writings. And the biggest Jewish philosopher, Flavius Josephus, who wrote the Antiquities of Rome, Antiquities of Jews, and the Wars of Jews, the most famous Jewish historian, does not mention him either in earlier versions. But later we find a sentence or two added up, which according to most of the experts are later additions probably by Christians. Cornelius Tacitus or Tranquillus, the Roman historians, mention about a new sect which was being persecuted by the Roman emperors. But there is no allusion about Christ. They say maybe this was established by somebody called Christus or something. Even Pliny the Younger, the 2nd century historian, does not have any reference to Jesus. He also mentions about a new sect being persecuted. So there is no historical evidence at all. Now, is there any evidence for his birth? Nothing. Nobody knows when he was born. Even Christian theologians agree that no particular date is known as to when he was born. It was accepted by Paul, the pagan December 25th, which was the birth date of most of the gods, was accepted, and that is being followed. It was Julius first Pope who officially declared that is the birth rate of Jesus. It is only, simply his own imagination. There's no historicity in that. Matthew, the evangelist, who tried to see that every prophecy regarding a Jewish redeemer, the Jews were expecting a king, a strong king, to redeem them from the captivity of Romans. And this redeemer, there is a lot of prophecies, and then Matthew tries to fulfill many of these prophecies regarding the redeemer in Jesus. So he makes him take birth in Bethlehem. But there's no proof for that. And then maybe he was born there or somewhere else, but he grew up as the son of Mary and Joseph, But in the Gospels we find his fatherhood is ascribed to Yahweh, the Jewish God. But he grew up in the Jewish family with 4 brothers and sisters as mentioned in Mark 3:31, 6:3, Luke 8:19, Matt 12:46. There are so many evangelists who have written about this fact that he had so many brothers and sisters and they were a poor family. Jesus was apprenticed to his father's trade, carpentry, and he grew up there, a Jewish boy who knew about Jewish Torah, scriptures, who became an expert in first in the family and later on in the nearby synagogue. So he became quite thorough with the Jewish traditions and Jewish scriptures. And maybe he got training in healing people, in exorcising devils. We don't know. Because later we find that this guy became a very eloquent speaker. And he could have become a rabbi. There are so many 16 verses in the Gospels which mention that this Jesus was a rabbi. We find in John 3:26, 1:38, 6:25, Mark 9:5, 11:21, Matthew 26:49, 26:25. There are so many, 16 or more verses which depict that this guy was a Jewish rabbi. If he was a rabbi, he must have had been married, because no rabbi could be in that position without marriage. So Jesus could be a married Jewish rabbi who knew about the Torah and the scriptures, and he was well trained to give fiery, eloquent speeches, and he did that. He actually begins his public ministry. We do not know anything about his childhood from birth to 30 years. Nobody knows, except that some evangelists have written about missing him when he was 12, like, Buddha, and later finding him in a temple discoursing with the priests of the synagogue. And then we find also that this guy going and, turning water into wine as per his mother's wishes. This is what Dionysus' god did. So in order to make him God, these evangelists have written something here and there, but otherwise, the entire childhood and youth of this guy is unknown to the world. So when he was 30 or so, we do not know exactly the date. He started his public life, or whatever, Christians say public life. He was baptized by John the Baptist of the time, and then he set out to preach when John the Baptist was arrested. And he goes around, he preaches, he exhorts people to go back to the ways of Yahweh. He tells them to mend their ways. He is very angry with the hypocritic, ways of the Jewish elite, the scribes and the Pharisees. He calls them whitewashed tombs, sons of vipers. And these Jewish elite naturally got together, conspired to get him killed, and they forced Pontius Pilate to kill him. We will come to that. In his preaching, he got here and there a few followers. And one of the followers, a few ladies were also following him, was Mary Magdalene, who was a prostitute. And there is a reference in which Mary Magdalene, when she meets Jesus, she anoints his feet with a very expensive spikenard oil, which is more than 300 denarii worth. And his own disciples tell him why this expensive oil is used on his feet. But Jesus rebukes them, and then he could have become probably very close with this Mary Magdalene, whom he could have married, as we shall see later. This is mentioned in Luke 8:2-3 and Mark 19:40-41. We have, enough verses to show that Jesus was close to this prostitute, and he became revolutionary in that sense. Other than that, There is also stories that his crucifixion was, let's say historic, was very important. The whole world stood still. There was earthquake. This is all what Christians say. But according to the historian Flavius Josephus, in AD 7, 7,000 Jews were crucified by the Romans. And when Jesus Christ was crucified, that was not something uncommon, a very common sight. Every day they were crucifying people. And Jesus was not crucified in the cross that we see. He was crucified in a T, T, the upper portion is not there. A T-like cross. So actually the criminal had to carry only the cross portion. The vertical post was always remaining there so that the soldiers could easily fix this cross piece and then nail him down to the cross. So he could carry only this cross piece after getting scourged or beaten or flogged, whatever. So he carried that and the soldiers nailed on him, and then it was seen that, Jewish custom, they did not like a dead body hanging on the cross in the night. So the soldiers were careful to see that he died very fast. So they hung him in such a way that he died in less than an hour's time. When he died and body was taken out and he was buried, and we see that this Mary Magdalene going to anoint the body as per the verses in the Gospels. And at that time, a dead man's body could be anointed only by his wife or a man. So Mary Magdalene going there to anoint the body of Jesus Christ clearly shows she was his wife. And there are other evidences to show that she was his wife. See, there is a lost gospel which is found in the British Library, written in vellum in AD 570 in a language called Syriac, of course, which is very close to Aramaic, the language Jesus and his disciples spoke at the time. And in this lost gospel, which is written in Syriac, it was interpreted by Professor Barry Wilson and also Jacovici, a Israeli filmmaker, and professor is in Toronto, a well-known professor. They have interpreted this gospel and clearly proved that Jesus was married to Mary Magdalene and he had children. So we find an ordinary person who was a rabbi, a preacher, goes around preaching, and then he got, inimical with the Jewish elite and gets crucified. How can a crucifixion ordered by the then government of the time become atonement for the sins of mankind? There is no meaning in that. Absolutely no meaning. And when he died, the evangelists create stories of ascension and things like that. It's very easy because his body was not found in the sepulchre whether he was buried, and then he appeared. He is said to have appeared to a few disciples. So the story of resurrection gets established. But then when he died, what happens? Saint Paul comes in picture. Saint Paul gave meaning to his death. Saint Paul said what? He died for the sins of humanity for the first time. For the first time. There was no other person have ever said about that. The Jews were expecting a redeemer, a king, to redeem them from this captivity of the Romans. Nothing more. So Saint Paul begins or theorizes about redemption, and he puts it in his Gospels. He never says that Jesus did any miracle. He never speaks about virgin birth. He did not know any one of those things. Because the Gospelists or evangelists wrote them much later than Saint Paul. Saint Pauline theology was introduced into the Gospels, and the evangelists had another view. They wanted to make this guy a god. So they brought in miracles. They brought in so many other things, the virgin birth, the resurrection, things like that. And Paul established the church. You see, Jesus never established as a church. Paul did that because Paul at that time did believe that like the other mythical gods, this person also died for the sins of mankind. And he was a fiery, eloquent speaker and writer. He was led a Roman citizen, persecuted. So he made a church. He made churches here and there in Rome, in Antioch, so many places. And he is the one who is the establisher and founder of the Christian church, not this guy, this poor Jew. He had nothing to do with that. And later on, evangelists came and they bring in the story of God. And when this was accepted, when the whole, Christianity, that sect was accepted by Roman Empire as the official religion of Rome, Christ becomes a God. Christ becomes a universal God. An ordinary person is made a God, and with the power of the empire, it becomes established. And we find a very funny things here. You see, the Jewish God Yahweh is made, or Jesus is made to turn against the Jewish God Yahweh with the destruction of the Jerusalem temple in AD 70. The Romans restored them. And because the evangelists wrote their books, their anonymous books, Gospels or whatever, after the destruction of the Jerusalem temple in AD 70, they make Jesus turn against Jews. They, curse him. Jesus is made to curse them, and a new religion. That makes a new religion to start. Actually, it is very, very contradictory, because Yahweh selected the Jews from all times. He freed them from slavery in Egypt. He delivered them. He brought them together with him. He rehabilitated them in Palestine after destroying the then nations of Palestine. He traveled with them in an ark. And now Jesus, who is the Son of Yahweh, turns against the very Jews who were God's own people. Can you find such, stories, such contradictory, nonsense stories anywhere else in the world? Well, you can think about that. Anyway, what I feel is, from my readings and from whatever that is written so far, this person, Jesus, whom we call a God or whatever, was an ordinary Jew. His name was Yeshua. He was a Jewish rabbi who went around like any other Jewish preacher, went around preaching and asking the people to walk in the ways of the Yahweh, or the Jewish God, and mend their ways. Anyway, think about it. Thank you very much.